as you've already heard, running this webinar today. And she's the Executive Director of Holistic Student Supports at Achieving the Dream. So we're very thankful to have you with us for this hour and future events beginning in 2019. So thanks very much, and we'll just turn it over to you. And we are, for everyone that's on the line, we are recording.
All right, great. Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. Hopefully you all are able to see the slides and follow along. I'm really excited to be with you this afternoon to talk more about holistic student supports and the alignment with the Guided Pathways work that you all are hard at work on, and then get you set up for the time we'll spend together at your third institute in February, focusing specifically on this topic. So I wanted to do a little bit of an overview and general about it, and then make sure that you have the information you need to prepare for the institute, the pre-work, and all of that. Feel free to chime in with questions or put them in the chat box. So sorry, I just realized I'm maybe moving things around on your screen. I also wanted to give you a disclaimer. I am home with a 4-year-old that has a fever, so if there's any interruptions, it may be that, but hopefully there won't be, thanks to PBS Kids online. But I do want to give that disclaimer. So let's get started. So I like to start with this slide, this cartoon. You can see here we've got the square, who perhaps is a institutional staff member or administration or something, saying you're going to have to change to fit the system. And then we've got the circles, the students saying, or how about you change the system so we can all fit. And I like to set that reframing as we talk about holistic student supports because, we are really focusing on that recognizing that there are some kind of systemic barriers. There's some structures and processes that we've inherited that aren't necessarily ideal for our students, and that may really impact their ability to, get on the path and stay on the path when we make this great Guided Pathways experience for them. And so the Holistic Student Supports is really about that. It's about how we're going to change the system to make sure that all students can fit. The other thing I like to do up front is make sure that folks know that we're not talking about a new initiative. It's not like, oh, we're doing Guided Pathways, now we're going to have to do another initiative in addition. It's really all the same thing. To us, the Holistic Student Support work, that's how we operationalize students getting on the path and keeping them on the path. Right, so it's not, and we're fine. You don't need to go and tell people, oh yeah, we're going to a holistic student supports thing or any of that. It's really about this is an approach and a model for redesigning systems and structures to help us really operationalize the Guided Pathways work. So this is a process map that someone came up with when they were trying to, for their institution, kind of make those connections for themselves. That this is really aligned work. So just to give you a little of the context, and you may be familiar with some of this, in terms of how we've arrived in the field at this concept of holistic student supports. About 7 years ago, there was the first round of Gates-funded IPAS grants, so Integrated Planning and Advising Systems, and it really focused on this idea of technology-enabled advising, that technology was going to really help improve advising. We recognized that there was a need there. And people were thinking, oh, all these new technologies on the market, this has got to be there. And, I think that was really good for centering that we needed to give more attention to advising and that technology could help us create some efficiencies. But it made it seem like technology was a silver bullet. So, we really learned from that, and particularly with NACADA, this greater emphasis then on advising as teaching and still using the technology, but the emphasis being on the relationship in advising, and advising taking on that teaching function, not just being transactional. But that kind of centered the advisors as the point of the problem, or advising as an isolated kind of standalone part of the work, when really we realized, to do advising well, to connect students to the supports they need, to even have an early alert system, you have to really integrate structures and services on campus. And that led then to the integrated advising and student support movement about 3 years ago with the second round of IPAS grants. It was really focused on kind of bridging the silos at the institution, and, still with that emphasis on how can we create more meaningful advising interactions with students using technology, but recognizing that this has to be a whole college effort. You'll see that dotted line arrow going from the financial stability piggy bank, and that recognizes kind of a parallel track that we've had happening over the past 7 years, that started really with this emphasis on financial education. And we had a grant back in 2011, that the financial education for student success, that really focused on kind of low-touch financial education services. And, what kind of impact could that have? Because we knew the financial piece was part of what was really affecting students to stop out. And that led to, a lot of learning that, yes, we've got to integrate this financial stability, financial education piece into the work, but recognize we needed to broaden that understanding of all of the needs of students beyond the academic ones. That led to our Working Student Success Network grant focused on non-academic supports, and specifically how to bundle those, how to integrate those and deliver them to students in a meaningful way. So it recognized we need to be focusing on transportation, childcare, housing insecurity, all of those different pieces. But the question for WSSN was, well, how do we really package them in a way that best meets the needs of our students? So when you kind of take those two strands, we're now at the point over the past year where we've been integrating those two strands of work, recognizing that part of this shift to holistic student supports is putting the student in the center, picking up from the IPASS work the structure and process redesign that we know has to happen to make it meaningful, and then also, infusing that with the deeper understanding about service delivery and connection through the non-academic support work. So that's just a little bit about that kind of evolution that led us here. Now, when we start talking about what holistic student supports really means, we like to share this slide because we all, you may have your own version of this. Typical student gets bounced around to different services because often our services are set up in a very fragmented way. And, they may be delivered in a transactional way versus relational. That's often due to, we've got a line out the door. So, yeah, we got to kind of do the transactional interaction. It's hard to really move to that developmental interaction when you've got a line out the door. Students, can get bounced around. And we often sometimes try to take an inoculation approach, right, where we're like, here, student, at orientation, let me give you a list of all the services you may ever need, and hopefully you'll remember to use them, versus really sustaining our connection and connecting them to the services and supports they need when they need them and in the way that they need them. So this slide often resonates with folks. We've got different institutions call this different things. Bunker Hill calls it the bunker bounce. Trident Technical calls it the ping pong effect. You may have your own version at your institution. But, there's a lot, I think, for a lot of faculty and staff, they know this is the experience of students, and they definitely, they want to change that and make it into something more holistic. And so when we really think about what that would mean, this image I like because it captures that, for example, the blue student and the green student have different supports around them because we're trying to really personalize the experience. We're also trying to streamline it so they're not having to bounce around to different offices, and they don't have to, and they're really sustaining, they're sustained with the student throughout their whole time at the institution. So, through our work over the past 5 years, we found that institutions can see the greatest impact in their holistic student support redesign when they focus on 4 things. One is that all students are supported to achieve their goals through the early intentional development of academic, career, and financial plans. So for some of our institutions, their goal with this work is that every student create an academic, career, and financial plan in their first semester. And, when you get down to trying to make that happen, that's a lot of redesign of the onboarding experience. That is also why this is so critical to the Guided Pathways work and why Guided Pathways is so critical to this. To have those clarified paths and to be able to do that academic, career, and financial planning really has to be aligned with the Guided Pathways redesign work. The second piece is that students only have to tell their story once, so they're not getting that bounce around. That they're proactively connected to the supports that they need that are really targeted to their individual needs so that they can come to the classroom in the best conditions to learn. And finally, that they feel confident that faculty, staff, and administrators are invested in their success. And this comes from a lot of the research that says, not only is sense of belonging important for retention, but also that students are more likely to follow through on using a service if they're connected to it by someone that they know. So, often we have institutions that say, okay, what's the model? We centralize advising, we create a one-stop, But the thing is, there's not just one model. It really is, it has to fit your institutional context and environment. But what we do know from the research is that to really have a holistic approach, it has to align with these 5 design principles: sustained, strategic, integrated, proactive, and personalized. So SIP, that comes out of the Community College Research Center's work. So, when we talk about what that looks like in practice, to reach that sustained place where students are receiving support throughout their entire life course, education life course, not just inoculated at the beginning, things like assigning advisors, creating long-term coaches. I know that many of you have already started doing some of these pieces. Building in milestones along their path that are kind of, required check-in points and things like that are another strategy that people use. The strategic design principle, that's really focused on the fact that we don't have all the endless resources. We have to figure out how to maximize resources and target the interventions and the engagement to the people, to the students that need them the most, when they need them, and the way they need them. So, we know not all students need that high-touch one-on-one all the time, and not all students need that, and they don't want it. So, and we can't do it for all of them. So we have to figure out the right combination of the low-touch, high-touch, and when and who gets that at what point. And that's where it's really important, the use of the analytics, and as well as other strategies for how to get some of those rote tasks that people don't need the face-to-face time on, the technology that can help them build their initial plan so they're not building from scratch with the advisor, but they get some work going on their own, or using things like group advising to take off some of those like less nuanced tasks. Another strategy we're seeing used here is around using intake surveys during application to really help triage students' needs even earlier, before they even come to that. The integrated piece, that recognizes that this work is about bringing together disparate silos, disconnected technologies, siloed departments into a more a cohesive and seamless experience for the students. So that requires things like shared case notes, student profiles, and really building stronger kind of connections between the offices, particularly so students don't have to keep telling their story over and over. The proactive one, this is the idea that we want to catch students before they reach that crisis point, which often is, can be too late. So things like early alert, not just having the system and raising the flags, but actually having the processes and the back-end work to connect students to evidence-based interventions as a part of that. And then finally, the personalized, and that's, again, a nod to the fact that they're most likely to follow through when they're connected to the supports by an individual that they know. So, it sounds really great, the SIP. It's such a nice, tidy acronym. Not that we need any more acronyms in our work, but it's hard work. And, part of why it's so hard is that we're talking about transformative change. And so we like to use CCRC's definition of transformative change to get at just why this is so hard to do. We're looking to create structural, process, and attitudinal change, because really they say, from the org theory research, you're not going to achieve transformative change if you don't have all 3 of those. So, structural change, sometimes we think of those as the easiest, but that can be really hard. That's where we kind of lay the framework for new behaviors, whether it's new technology, a new type of position, or kind of bringing together, physically bringing together different offices. The process change is really about reforming how people do their jobs at the individual level. So it's changing behaviors, new processes that change behaviors. And then finally, the attitudinal change. People often think this one is the hardest, and I think it's because at the end of the day, this is about change leadership, and we're talking about changing the way people do their jobs. And that's hard and scary. People don't like change. So there's definitely a need for change leadership. When I talk about our toolkit and the Institute a little later, I'll raise that again, that to really get that behavioral attitudinal change, it requires a lot of intentional communication and generating kind of buy-in and engagement from the beginning. So as we've worked with institutions on this redesign, there's been kind of 5 key institutional practices that we've noticed across the institutions that have been successful with this work. So having these in place have really helped institutions be successful. The first is establishing shared responsibility. So, that's really the recognition that, instead of kind of finger pointing different parts of campus, we're really talking about that people need to understand their role in student success, and that we all have a shared responsibility for that and are each a key piece of this puzzle in order to be able to provide that seamless, consistent experience for students. Building meaningful relationships, that's both about the sense of belonging, the relationships we want to build between students, with students, but also between departments. Monitoring student progress and needs. This again is where it's so important that the guided pathways work really ground how we design our model of support, because we have to be able to monitor their progress and needs, and it is so much easier to do that when we're able to get them on a clear program map. Leveraging the targeted data and technology is an acknowledgement that we have to find ways to create efficiencies to do this at scale, because that has to be the goal. It's not just about doing this for certain populations. It's about making sure that we can create a structure where we can intervene with any student when they need it in the way that they need that. And we have to use the data and technology to help us get there. And then finally is reimagining policy and practice. When you think about what it takes to institutionalize this type of redesign, and particularly when we're talking about people doing their jobs differently, and when we're talking about trying to create a consistent student experience, we have to be willing to change job descriptions, performance review, establish clear accountability and expectations. And that requires a commitment to the policy and practice piece. I've seen some institutions where administrators are like, yeah, we want to do this, but we don't want to have to change anything documented. And so then the question is, how are we really going to ensure that this experience really transforms the student's experience? So I'm just going to share a few lessons, and I'm going to move to talk about the resources and the Institute, and take any of your questions as well. Because again, this was just kind of an overview to get you hopefully excited and start thinking about the pre-work in particular. So just a few lessons that I wanted to share, because this ties into some of the work that we'll be doing with you. The first is that I think that the technology piece, we don't like to lead with the technology piece, and I know you all have been doing some work with technology, but really emphasizing that this whole redesign effort, it's about creating a relational model. It's not about replacing people with technology. The other thing is creating a strong vision is a really important step, because it can feel threatening that we would be talking about changing the way we used to do things. If people can see where we're trying to go, it helps generate some of that engagement and buy-in that's really important early on in the work, and that's one thing that we'll be doing at the Institute. The other thing is, once we have that vision, people need to know what this means for the work that they do. And, in the absence of information, people usually fill it in with other information that may not be true. So really getting in front of that. And that's why whole chapter of our toolkit is just on creating a communication plan for this work. And then, the other piece is aligning the student success initiatives. Again, however best you want to talk about this at your institution. Is it you're just going to call it guided pathways, or whatever language resonates with you, but so people can understand the alignment of this work as being a part of the whole agenda that you have, a student success agenda that you are advancing. And then the last thing is the importance of knowing students and designing a student that serves them all. And part of this is, we're designing a student for you. We're designing a model that serves your students, not someone else's students, not the ideal student. And so for many of our institutions, that means if 60% of their students are part-time, then we have to make sure that design works for them, not just for kind of the first-time full-time students. On this note of engaging students, and this is kind of my segue into the pre-work, I do want to plant those seeds for thinking about how you're going to engage students in this redesign. Sometimes we can come in as faculty and staff and say this, and this need to change, but we may be missing a whole bunch of other factors that the students are experiencing and we may not realize. So one example of that is we worked with an institution on process mapping, and we'll be definitely doing lots of process mapping and building on existing process maps if you already have some. And the process mapping that the institution did, they first did it with faculty and staff, and then they had students come in, and they did a focus group with students, had the students move things around and add to it. And one thing that they noticed that the faculty and staff hadn't put on there, but the students did, was this yellow post-it that said, "Take a ticket and wait." And it's not that students were taking a ticket and waiting at each of those points, but that was the feeling that they had at each of those points, and the faculty and staff did not know that. That was not clear to them. And so it really shifted what they did as they thought about what the ideal experience would be. So again, I'm planting that seed, and I'll talk about it more in a minute as you think about the pre-work that we'll need to gather for the Institute in February. So one of the things that we'll be using is Achieving the Dream's new Holistic Student Supports Toolkit. So, we'll have hard copies of that for everyone that's coming. But I did want to give you the link to the electronic version, which you're welcome to download, and I encourage you to. It really gives a sense of kind of the what, why, and how. It's got templates, tips, it's got other institutional examples. At this website, you'll also find some institutional case studies. So we've got 4 case studies of how different institutions have approached this work. And that may also be helpful as you're either kind of generating understanding among your colleagues or just for yourself to understand more about the holistic student support work. So we'll make sure you get these slides so that you can go to that website and download that material. So when we're together in February, we have a few goals. So, the first is we want to make sure that you've got a really clear understanding of the components of holistic advising and student support and how they link to your Pathways work. Not to Pathways in general, but we really want you to apply them to the work you're already doing on your Pathways work. The other thing is, we want you to work on some specific components while you're there. So we have some facilitated team time to work on specific components of kind of the strategy execution of this work, including things like process mapping, that communication work, progress tracking, and things like that. So there'll be a lot of hands-on work for your team to be engaged in. And then finally, we really want you to be able to walk out with an initial action plan. Because I know you can go to these events and it's so exciting and you got a lot of momentum, and you get back to the office where you've got a ton of emails, and it's, so we want to make sure you've got all the clear next steps you want to take to make it even easier to continue that momentum when you get back. So I'm winding down here, so get your questions ready. I just wanted to end with the pre-work. So what we'd like for everyone to do before we're together at the end of February is to read Chapter 1 of the toolkit, and we can send these out on email, but you can also, again, download that at that website on the previous slide. And we'd also like you to complete the discovery inventory. So this is in Chapter 4 of the toolkit. And again, we'll send you, you can download the template from the website, but we'll also make it easy so you don't have to hunt around for it. We'll send you the Word version so you can type into it. This discovery inventory, it really walks through all of the different kind of pieces of the student's journey, from admission through orientation, getting into their advising session, how advising is happening, connecting to other supports, all of those pieces. And we found that it's a really critical piece to bring to the Institute so that there is a common understanding of what the existing student experience is, and that we've started to get some engagement from others. So, I know for the Institute, you all already have your set, you've got your kind of Pathways teams. This discovery inventory, you may need to go to some departments like financial aid or, advising if they're not already on your team. And make sure that they are contributing to completing this discovery inventory in advance of the Institute. So it's kind of the voice of others that may not be able to join you in person at the Institute, but you've got their ideas. We're just asking you to complete columns 1 and 2 of that discovery inventory, which is column 1 is what is the existing process. So what is the kind of current as-is state. Column 2 is what are the barriers, challenges, or gaps with the existing. And that's all we want you to do. It is a long document, but just column 1 and column 2, again, bringing in the broad stakeholders. And here's where I'd give you a little nudge to consider how you might include students. Could you bring together a focus group to walk through different parts of the discovery inventory and get their input? We wanted to make sure you got this well in advance. I know we're coming up on the winter breaks and things like that, but if you're able to, that would be another great way to make sure that we continue to have the student voice throughout this discovery and design process. We're also asking that you try to send those to Sarah by February 21st. And that just is going to help me and the other facilitators get a sense of where everyone is as we really kind of try to tailor and customize the delivery of the Institute to you all. So we hope that you will do that. So that was my fast overview of everything. I wanted to see if there were any questions that have come in. See. I'm not seeing any or hearing any. So I hope that means either you're all just right away starting to work on your discovery inventory because you're so excited, or it's Friday and you're ready to go home. Either one is fine. Both options are fine. Oh, put the homework slide back up. Yes, and I will.
I'll also send out, this is Sarah, I'll also send out an email with these instructions and the links to the pre-work this afternoon.
Yep, absolutely. Okay.
You're welcome.
Great. Well, again, when you get the slides, you'll have my email. You always have Sarah's, and I encourage you to reach out if any questions pop up for you as you start working on the pre-work or start thinking about this work in general. We're looking forward to working with you, and we'll make sure you get the slides and all of the attachments and instructions as well.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Mei-Yen, and we will see you in February.
Okay, great. See you all then. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.